and that's what's going to allow you through. Really, it's been made very simple, even though it's very sophisticated technology on the back end. Again, these authentication apps are considered some of the most secure, but they're a little harder to use. So again, if you want to use SMS texting, that's okay too. USB dongles is another option, but it's very rare in sort of everyday life unless someone's giving it to you. You don't need to choose that. Let's keep going. Microsoft has done studies. Google has done studies. Basically 100% of attacks can be blocked by multi-factor authentication. And we have seen this bear out in our across our customer base as well. It's a standard. We push it out to everybody now. It's not optional. Phishing recommendations. The last thing I want to talk about is disabling macro access. This is something I've learned about over the past few years, is that macros are the simplest way to write code that infects either a Mac or a PC, because everyone's really familiar with opening Word and Excel documents. And we may have this knee-jerk habit to just click enable macros when we're presented with one of those little yellow bars. So my recommendation is that you turn it off. I'm going to have a little screen share in a second here. Let's click through to show how to do that. But basically you get that little security warning and you may instinctively enable content, and that's what they want you to do. I have heard stories, I've not seen this in my personal world, where you may have a salesperson and they are told, hey, I'm going to send you an email with a Word doc. It's going to have this enable content. Click that. I've heard stories of that. I've never heard of it truly happening, but there is that potential. So my recommendation is that you just go into the preferences for Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Go ahead and click to the next screen. And you can go to the Trust Center, macro settings, and say disable without notification. And then, it's disabled and it's not even going to tempt you to turn on macros. Because I have heard of macros in my personal world of them being malware, the source of malware. So that's all I've got. Those are my recommendations. Look for who it's coming from, look where it's sending you to. And turn on multi-factor, turn off macros, and you'll be in pretty good shape. And now I pass it off to Debbie.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, I wanted to wrap up with some tips for how to protect yourselves in your organizations, and then also give you a brief overview of some of the laws that apply in the privacy and data breach spaces. First of all, those of you with employees or with clients who have employees know the importance of having an employee handbook so that you can set expectations for your employees, and then when necessary, correct them or terminate them. And part of your employee handbook should include policies for your company's computer equipment, computer technology, software, all of those things that Peter and Jonathan have been talking about. The employee handbook should make it clear that the computers are company property and should never be used for personal purposes. All computer files and data within the company are company property and should never be used for anything other than company purposes. That the employee handbook should emphasize that usernames and passwords are private and also company property, and must never be shared unless it's with the company's IT people or somebody that is a trusted person within the organization. And if an employee's password somehow gets compromised, the employee should be required to notify the company immediately when that happens so that the password can be disabled. Employees should be counseled that company emails should be used for company purposes only. And hopefully that will prevent them from clicking on things that come from Yahoo or Google or other places that Jonathan mentioned might be phishing for employees to click on things they shouldn't be clicking on. And if the company issues laptops, employees should be warned that those are required for, or only company issued laptops can be used for remote access to the company's network. So prevent employees from using their personal computers, which might not have appropriate protections in place when they're accessing the company's systems remotely. And employees should always be told that they need to log out whenever they're away from their computer for a period of time. If they're going to lunch, there should be a way for them to block or secure their computer so that nobody else can access it, using a password, not necessarily logging out, but just locking the screen so that nobody can get in. And then in addition to what you put in the employee handbook, there are various practices that can be employed within the organization to try to minimize the risk of a breach. Training the employees in how to use the company software so that they're not tempted to go out and try to Google a way to do something within the company software and end up on some site that ends up compromising the company. Use of periodic phishing tests to test employees. And these are outside vendors who have software that can mimic a phishing test or a phishing attempt. And what it ends up doing is telling your IT people who's clicking on these fake phishing attempts, so that the IT crew can work with the employees who are getting tricked by it and getting them some training and some remediation if necessary. You should also block access to social media sites like Yahoo, Facebook, all the things that people like to use, and also outside email services. At my firm, I can't check my Hotmail or my Google Gmail from within when I'm logged in at work. I'm just not allowed to do it. So I use my phone to keep up with mom and dad and whoever else. But that's a good policy to have in place. Also, you can password protect mobile devices that access your company's email. So for example, with me, on my iPhone and iPad, I have to put in a password or use my fingerprint to get in every time I want to look at something, because I also have access to my work email on those two devices. So it's a little bit inconvenient for me, but protects the company against somebody picking up my phone and getting into my email. Also using website privacy policies. And this is kind of for external people coming to your website, that gives them notice about how you're using information and how you're securing it and sharing it if you're sharing it, and also get their consent to using the information and to cookies if you're using cookies. And then when an employee is terminated, the employee's access to all the company's computer systems should be immediately disabled. That's something that sometimes is forgotten, and people can continue to have access after they've left the building. Now I'll go into some of the legal areas that apply in this area. There are two different kind of sets of laws. One is data privacy laws, and then the other is data breach laws. So data privacy, I'm sure y'all see in the news almost every day, some state is enacting some new sweeping data privacy law, California being one of the most extensive, I guess, and overreaching privacy laws in the country right now. But a lot of states are doing that. The EU has their global data protection regulation. So this is becoming pretty much, a common thing that we're all going to have to be dealing with. And in New Mexico right now, our privacy law regulates only use of social security numbers. I imagine at some point, we may end up somewhere between California and something else with respect to data privacy laws in New Mexico. There are various federal laws that apply depending on what the business is doing. For example, HIPAA, as you know, is medical information. Gramm-Leach-Bliley applies to banking and insurance products. Fair credit reporting is consumer information for obtaining credit. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, if you have websites that are targeted to children 13 years of age or younger, the COPA has specific requirements for parental notification, parental consent, and different things that can and cannot be done with information regarding children. The Federal Trade Commission has pretty broad authority to bring actions under the power to prevent unfair or deceptive trade practices. And if you get the FTC on your back, it's not a fun place to be. So good to comply with whatever federal law applies to your data collection efforts and privacy protection. And then one area that frequently gets overlooked is, we have the legal structures, the laws and regulations that apply federally and at the state level, but also increasingly vendor and customer contracts are including privacy requirements and notification requirements, and sometimes going so far as to have a company certify that, for example, in my case, I do a lot of banking representation, and one of my bank clients requires that we certify every year that we have in place certain privacy and data protection methodologies. So make sure you understand what's in your vendor and customer contracts to make sure that you're complying with whatever is required. And you might consider, if you have vendors or service providers who are collecting your customers' information or accessing your customers' information, that those vendors and suppliers, service providers, are also maintaining confidentiality and privacy of the data that they may be accessing within your systems. And then we have the data breach notification acts. In New Mexico, we have a fairly recent act that applies to any personally identifying information, which is, just to summarize, names, addresses, dates of birth, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, anything that could personally identify a person. Companies are required to maintain reasonable security procedures and practices. It's unclear at this point what would be considered reasonable. This law hasn't been tested in courts yet, but reasonableness sometimes is evaluated based on what other companies in your industry are doing. So be careful of that. And the New Mexico Act also provides that your contracts with service providers also must require that they implement reasonable security procedures and practices. If a breach happens, the Act requires notification to all affected New Mexico residents within 45 days of the breach. And then if it's a widespread breach of more than 1,000 people are affected, the Attorney General has to be notified. And then the Attorney General can look into the breach and determine whether anybody suffered financial loss or any other kind of loss. And then if there was knowing or reckless conduct on the part of the company who suffered the breach, the Attorney General is empowered to impose a civil penalty of up to $150,000. So the consequences of a data breach can be not only inconvenient to the company, but can cost a lot of money in correction, reporting, compensating victims for financial losses, and then paying whatever fines attorney generals might decide to impose. I think that's all I had, unless anyone has any questions. We wanted to wrap it up with warning everybody to be careful out there.
Fiona, do you, I can stop sharing. Hold on for 1 second.
I've got a question for Debbie.
Right.
All right. Go ahead, Bob.
You mentioned GDPR, and I'm curious about something on that. I occasionally have people attend open enrollment workshops I do, and they're from outside the country. And I have to collect data on them for an instrument we use. They are voluntarily coming into my company. I'm not a member of the European Union, and my country is not a member of the European Union. So what real how does that really affect me legally?
With the GDPR and a lot of the state data privacy laws, You're required to comply with those laws if you're soliciting or collecting information from residents of those jurisdictions. So if you have customers in the GDPR and you're collecting information, for example, if they come to your website and provide registration information, you do need to comply because you're making yourself available, your services available to people in that jurisdiction.
Okay, so pardon me if this sounds argumentative, but does this mean that the European Union can make laws that affect me?
European Union can make laws that protect their citizens. And if you're taking advantage and benefiting from commerce with their citizens, yes, they can protect their citizens.
Wow. Okay.
And that's the issue with the data privacy laws that are being enacted. They are very, very far reaching. And in this, global commerce, everybody's on the internet. It makes sense from a consumer protection perspective, but it makes it very difficult and expensive for companies to keep up with all the laws that can affect their businesses.
Yeah. Okay.
There's
Thank
a
you.
question here from Peter. Why doesn't New Mexico supply the required disclose statement mandated by the 1974 Privacy Act when asking for social security number, for example, when registering to vote?
Okay, so really quick before you answer that, Fiona, I've made you the host. I
Oh.
actually have to jump off. It is 12:30. So
Sure.
I'm going to leave the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our presenters. That was a lot of great information. So appreciate that. I didn't want to just disappear. But Fiona, you are now the host so that we can keep recording the meeting. And thank you guys, everybody, for showing up. And thank you for all the information shared.
Thanks, Kelly.
Mhm.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Scully.
Okay, so that question from Peter, I'm assuming is intended for Debbie.
Correct.
I cannot answer for why New Mexico does or doesn't do anything. Sorry. New Mexico has a strange patchwork of laws.
It's been almost 50 years and the Privacy Act says, okay, if you're going to ask for example, social security number, you got to say what authorizes you have to give a disclosure statement that says what law authorizes you to ask, what you're going to use it for, who you're going to share it with, and whether or not it's mandatory or not. And New Mexico won't do it. Everywhere you go, every site you go to, you want to go pay your, file your biannual report. You want to go pay your CRS-1, whatever. They routinely ask for SSN and never provide the disclosure. I just think that's weird.
Yeah, it's not the only weird thing in New Mexico's legal structure, but yeah, it's unfortunate, but yeah, that's just, I have no answer for that.
Okay, sorry.
Jonathan apologized. He had to skedaddle. He had a meeting that he had to get to. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. You can ask me in chat for Jonathan, and I can send you answers or hook you up with a quick little chat with Jonathan if you need. Is there any more questions? And it's silent.
Okay. Well, thanks, Fiona.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.